Hello, everyone. My name is Chelsea Fiorentino, and I will also be talking about food today. Today, I will be presenting strategies for measuring the food system in the capital region. So before we begin, I'd just like to share my appreciation and thanks to those who've supported me throughout my practicum. So with the Community Social Planning Council, I had the privilege of working with an amazingly talented group of women. So I'd like to thank my supervisors, Marika Albert and Stephanie Hardman, as well as the rest of the team there for an amazing opportunity. And then I'd like to thank Linda Gagey from the Food Metrics Working Group. She just helped with some of the finishing touches of my Culminating project. And then my instructor, Nigel Livingston, as well as the rest of my fellow classmates for all of their support. I completed my practicum with the Community Social Planning Council of Greater Victoria, which I will be referring to as CSPC. And this organization leads economic, environmental, and social planning in the capital region here in BC. And they've been doing so for over 75 years. At the time of my practicum, CSPC was working closely with a group called the Food Metrics Working Group. And so for my practicum, I was primarily working within this collaboration, and I'll mostly be referring to the Food Metrics Working Group throughout this presentation. To begin, I will provide a bit of a background into the Food Metrics Working Group and the work that they're doing in the community. So the entire premises of the Food Metrics Working Group is the food system. So to provide a little bit of a definition, the food system is all of the complex relationships and processes that bring food from the land and waters to our plates. So as you can see on the board there, that the food system involves everything to do with food, from production, processing, buying, selling, consuming and wasting, and everything in between. And it's a highly complex system. The Good Food Network is a broad-based network of individuals and organizations in the capital region who have come together to raise some important questions about the local food system. So you can see some of the questions they're looking to address on the board there. And essentially their goal is to address key issues within the local food system while working to build a sustainable and robust regional food system. So research shows that an essential step to building a robust food system is to determine the current state of the food system and then to monitor it over time to identify any changes or trends, issues, or improvements. And so the Food Metrics Working Group was brought together for this purpose and to establish a measurement framework and a set of indicators to determine the current state of the food system here in the capital region and to monitor it over time. And so to do this, the Food Metrics Working Group was working with CSPC on 3 key phases, and those phases were a literature scan, stakeholder engagement, and developing an indicator selection criteria tool. So as a result of my practicum, I undertook these 3 key phases, and I developed a progress report outlining my findings and results. So for the first phase, which was a literature scan, just to give you a brief overview, through this literature scan, I reviewed 8 different communities and examples of indicator frameworks. And so these were the 8 frameworks that I pulled from the literature and provided information for the Food Metrics Working Group. The second phase was stakeholder engagement, and I spoke with 5 individuals from the Food Metrics Working Group who work in different areas of the food system. And with these stakeholders, I gathered feedback on what they're looking for in indicators, what data they have, what data they're hoping to collect, what are their gaps and assets. And then for the third phase, using the information from the literature scan, as well as the stakeholder engagement, I adapted an indicator selection criteria tool for the Food Metrics Working Group to use when they begin selecting indicators. So it is, well, kind of hard to see. So if you have questions afterwards, feel free to ask. But the general idea of this tool is to help the group members select indicators that are possible and feasible to collect data for, that are important and relevant to the context of the capital region, and that are valid and actually measuring what they're intended to measure. So from everything I learned from reviewing the literature and talking with stakeholders, I came up with 4 recommendations for the Food Metrics Working Group to move forward, and I outline these in my progress report. So the first recommendation is to update existing community resources and strategies. So I'm actually referring to 2 specific resources here. There's the Food Security Roadmap and the Good Food 2025 Strategy. So I'm recommending to update these 2 resources because they're actually in the talks of being updated anyways, and also because both of them have a number of goals and targets for the food system that have been established over time through research and knowledge. So indicators are typically used to assess progress towards a given goal or to assess change after an intervention. And so I think utilizing these 2 resources and their goals and targets would be really beneficial to establish indicators that are meaningful and have a purpose. The second recommendation I have is to refine existing key impact areas identified within the Capital Region's food system. And so what I'm referring to here is the Good Food 2025 strategy has 3 key impact areas. There's the local food economy, food access, and food literacy. So in each of these impact areas, there will be a number of goals and targets, and then a number of indicators to monitor those goals and targets. And those 3 impact areas specifically are seen all throughout the literature, and they're really great, and I think those are important to keep. But there's 2 impact areas that I think would also be beneficial to add. An impact area addressing sustainable environments, as well as an impact area addressing local government and food policy. Those 2 impact areas were highlighted in the literature as being very important. And stakeholders and food metrics group members also brought those forward, thinking that they would be important to add. The third recommendation I have is regarding the indicator selection process itself. So at least half of the frameworks I reviewed began their indicator selection process with a large list of indicators, and then they narrowed it down to a more manageable list through a group effort. So those 8 frameworks that I had reviewed all have a number of indicators within them. So I'm recommending to take all the indicators from those frameworks, compile them into a large list, and then as a group, using that indicator selection tool that I provided to narrow it down to a list of indicators that would be relevant for the local food system here. And then the 4th recommendation I have builds on that 3rd one, and it's utilizing stakeholder feedback. So a goal of the Food Metrics Working Group is to utilize stakeholder feedback from a broader base of community members. And so I'm suggesting a way to do this is in the indicator selection process. So stakeholders can provide a form of validity known as face validity, which utilizes the knowledge and expertise of professionals working in the field to determine whether an indicator is useful and appropriate. And so I think using indicator or using stakeholder feedback here when narrowing down that list of indicators would be really useful for determining indicators that are appropriate. So in conclusion, we know that food is a basic human need and that numerous studies show the causality between the food we eat and human health. And furthermore, we know that more and more research is showing the environmental issues having really large impacts on food systems, especially food systems around the world. And so I just wanted to share my presentation with you today to demonstrate that there is a passionate group of community members here in the Capital Region who are working towards establishing a resilient and sustainable food system to support the well-being and health of community members and the environment. Any questions?
Great job, thank you. Okay, questions?
Great presentation, Chelsea. So I'm just wondering, out of the recommendations you outlined, which one do you think could be the greatest challenge for the organization that you're working at?
I think they're all working towards them right now. I think the greatest challenge is is what order to do them in. I know they're wanting to update that food roadmap and the Good Food 2025 strategy, but there's also a group, the Food Metrics Working Group, they're really eager to get started on just jumping in and doing these indicators. And so I think the challenge is going to be, what to do first. Should we just start developing indicators, or should we wait until those two resources are updated so we can have a more updated vision of what goals and targets would be for the local food system and the strategies. So I think that's the struggle right now, is determining kind of what to do first and when to actually just get in it and start doing it.
Great job, by the way.
Thank you.
So yeah, you had mentioned engaging stakeholders. I'm not sure if it was in the area around like sifting through a lot of those indicators. I was wondering if stakeholders might include culturally distinct groups that have, so indigenous populations or the Muslim community that have very distinct cultural diets that may or not be native to the land in the sense that it's grown here, that it might not necessarily be shipped in. So how do you balance those type of culturally distinct populations and their food concerns?
Yeah, that's a great question. They're definitely wanting to include a cultural aspect into the indicators. So whether it's specific indicators to measure the indigenous food system or different cultural aspects of the food systems, or just to kind of weave it into all of the indicators in a sense, or the framework as a whole. But they do have some contacts that they will be working with when it comes to indicator selection. I don't know at what stage they will be contacting those indigenous references for selecting indicators. I don't know if it's going to be during the process, before, or afterwards to get their opinion. But I know so they're looking to do indigenous cultures, but the other cultures, I think those are really great points with the Muslim cultures and other cultures who have different cultural foods. So I'm not sure if there's any, not to my knowledge, no, but definitely with the indigenous culture, yes.
Any more questions? We have time for one more. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.